So welcome to the Cardmarket studio. We are here this week. It's December. The Modern Metagame has kept on progressing, and we have HarryMTG with us to talk about it and give us an update.
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Harry. I'm sure you all are somewhat familiar with me here on the Cardmarket channel, but here we are today to talk about the Modern Metagame. So what would you like to know?
Well, before we get into that, just because it's really important to let all of you guys know, we need you to sub to the channel if you are not subbed already. Like 50% of you are not subbed, and we really need it to help grow the channel. Every week you don't sub, we're gonna keep those blood moons in our sideboard. But speaking of blood moons, what is the metagame has been advancing a lot faster since Modern Horizons 2 came out. It's not the same state as it was at the ground state of Modern Horizons 2. Looking into December, what is the metagame looking at right now? Just like to someone who's been out of the loop.
So I think the most important thing to identify right now with the Modern Metagame is that it's really aggressive. What are the top decks right now in the format? It's Murktide, Hammer Time, you got Cascade decks like Rhinos and Living End. You also have mid-range decks that are trying to keep up with the aggro decks, but what do they really look like? For example, you've got Jund Ragavan, that's playing Urza Saga and Ragavan and Red and 6. I mean, those are extremely low to the ground cards.
It's not the boomer Jund we remember.
Yeah.
Even just before you continue on that, how well would you think someone coming up with good old Liliana, Tama, Jund, how well do you think they would fare?
I don't even think Liliana's a Jund card anymore, really.
I'm sorry.
Mean, you play it, you can't play Lurrus anymore. Lurrus is really good against the control decks in the mirror. Lily's also really slow. It also hits your hand. A lot of the matchups where Lily's good, I mean, you want to have cards in your hand, so it's quite counterintuitive.
And you would need that Lurrus to get back the cards. You discard it with the Lily, and you can't play your Lurrus if you have a Lily. Oh, it's all downhill from there.
Exactly.
So the meta is really aggressive.
Yeah.
You are seeing a lot of blue-eye control, which was really popular recently, and you're seeing 4-color control have a pretty big resurgence recently. So would you say that's to fight the aggressive metagame? Fifth?
Yeah, so I think control at the start of Modern Horizons 2 coming out was kind of decimated. We had Urza Saga and Ragavan that was really hard to deal with. Then people identified Prismatic Ending was really good. But then now all the control decks, specifically blue-white and Omnath control, is that they're playing Kahira in your sideboard and you're playing 4 Solitudes in the main. So Solitude is a really powerful tool right now. It's basically the force and will of the format. You can play Planeswalkers into quite big boards because you can pitch a Solitude to get rid of the biggest attacker. You also have the fact that Kahira is a white card that you can pitch to Solitude. It also supports cyber cards like Endurance that you can pitch to, so Kahira is really flexible in that sense, as it's a threat in the late game, as well as a pitch card in the early game. As well as just a good use of your mana a lot of the time, or like at least 10% of games, I find myself nothing to do on turn 3, just put the Kahira into hand, set up a Solitude. So I think you have the aggro decks, and then you do have this kind of weird curve of the speed of like mid-range decks and how control is trying to tackle them.
Do you think combo has a place in this current meta at all?
I mean, combo is always a weird discussion in Modern because
what even is a combo deck?
Yeah, exactly. So I think if you're talking strictly combo like Storm or something like Ad Nauseam or like Belcher, I think they all have their own positions, but right now I think Storm is too slow. I understand that Storm has turn 2, turn 3 kills.
What do they do against the Fairy Time Reveler?
Yeah, that, as well as like Gifts Ungiven, that's a 4 mana instant, that's really expensive. As well as there's a lot of discard, like Storm is not there. Belcher is somewhat there because Blood Moon's pretty good against the mana bases in the metagame, but that too will struggle a lot in my opinion. Like, I'm trying to stay away from combo right now in the format because what is everyone trying to do? They're trying to cheese you, and combo typically doesn't have interaction. So if you're looking to be a combo player, you need to be prepared to just lose to these aggro decks and Ragavans and stuff because you just can't deal with them.
So alright, we have an idea of what the modern metagame looks like now. It's shifted to a really aggressive place where combo and even slow mid-range doesn't have that much of a place. Now, so what would you say are the top 3 modern decks that people have to prepare for and bring sideboard cards in their sideboard against? And what would those sideboard cards look like for each of the decks?
Okay, so I think the top 3 decks right now, I think the deck I'm most scared of is Hammer Time. I don't know if that's the most played deck, but definitely it's a matchup where if you don't have sideboard cards, they'll run you over. Really against Hammer Time, you want specific interaction like Force of Vigor and Wear Tear. Any 2-for-1 that's very cheap is really good against them. Also, just having extra removal spells in your sideboard if you don't have specific artifact hate is really good. Like, for example, having extra lightning bolts in your sideboard if you're playing like 4 and Holy Heat 2 Bolt in the main or something like that. Just being able to interact for really cheap amounts of mana is what you want for Hammer Time. The second matchup I'd be concerned of is anything that involves the graveyard. I don't want to be going without some sort of endurance / relic of progenitus effect in my sideboard. You have Murktide Regents, you have flashback spells that you need to be worried about, like Memory Deluge.
You even have Gab randomly running around with Living End.
Yeah, Living End as well, like I mentioned. There's loads of incidental graveyard cards in the format right now that you need to have answers for in your sideboard. So I think it's important to give them all credit, as they will run you over if you don't show them respect. And then I think the third deck that you should be concerned about is Cascade. You know, there's a lot of decks in Modern right now where if you don't have preparation for them, you'll just get run over, like Hammer Time and Cascade decks. As you can see, a lot of control decks, they're playing 4 Teferi Time Raveler. Yep. I mean, you don't have to have Teferi in your deck. You can have Chalice of the Void on 0. You can have Engineered Explosives, play Engineered Explosives on 0. That can be cracked to kill the Rhinos. And you've already got sideboard cards for Graveyard Hate, so you don't need to be too worried about Living End, but just having some sort of way to deal with Cascade Rhinos, Living End, Graveyard, as well as fast decks like Hammer Time, and you should be pretty good with any board that you have.
All right, and now not to undermine your expertise on the Modern format, because it's pretty well recognized, but we just had a GP in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
Woo! What was that top 8? Why is there Infect and Affinity in there? Should we be expecting all of this Amulet Titan going on from now on? Like, how isn't the deck you recognize as the first deck to look out for featured there, despite even being at the top of Goldfish? Like, what would you say about that? And what's your opinion on that going forward?
Yeah, so I think Infect falls under the deck category of Hammer Time. They both have the same concept, just get a creature, pump it, bash. So that's kind of where you get the Infect coming from. I don't really have a pure reason why it did well. It's just like, that's Modern. You can have any deck top 8 an event. Like if it was Mill, we'd just be having the same discussion.
Yeah.
I don't think Infect's a bad deck. I don't think it's a particularly good deck. It's just a combo aggro deck that's pretty good that slipped into the top 8.
And all the artifact hate that people are packing doesn't really touch it. And then what about Primetime, for example? You saw so much Amulet Titan in that top 8.
Yeah, so with 2 Primetime decks in the top 8, I think it's just because it's a really skill-intensive deck. And what are people doing now that Paper's back? They're kind of relearning the muscle memory and kind of the skills of playing on Paper. Primeval Titan decks are really, really hard to play, and if you've mastered the deck, you can crush the average Modern player with it.
Also, I feel like no matter how many Ragavans you've been playing on MTGO, when it comes time to go play a Papal Tournament, you're like, how do I find these? They're so expensive. So you pull out your Primetime deck that you know how to play perfectly.
Yeah, I really like Primeval Titan decks right now because you attack both angles of having Primetime as an instant win, and you have Urza's Saga to back up, as well as Valakut Dryad. So you have 3 main win cons that are all really good against different matchups in the format. I think the only thing you got to be worried about as Primetime is the fast aggro decks. Although you're like an aggro combo deck in Titan, you can easily be run over by a hammer or whatever. So as long as you kind of are comfortable in very tight spots, Titan is a really good choice for you if you're good with the deck.
And what about Luris and Hardened Scales?
Yes, this is one that kind of brought me by surprise because I feel like the Rakdos build of Luris kind of phased out when the Jund/Saga Luris decks came into play. But I actually had Reed Duke as a guest on my podcast, Midweek Metagame. He played in GP Vegas and he said that he saw Luris decks all day. And
and they just didn't make it to the top 8?
Well, many made it into the top 8. And what happens when a deck is very popular in an event, the higher chance it makes it to the top 8. But also what happens when a deck's very popular, it's bad matchups do well. Hardened Scales. What's Hardened Scales all about? 2-for-1s, big artifacts. I mean, this is really hard for them to kill. Good against Luris decks. And that's one thing that Hardened Scales decks kind of prey upon, and that's why I think we see it in the top 8. And it's not, while I don't think Hardened Scales is a bad deck, I think it specifically did well because of all the Luris decks and how mid-rangey the tournament seemed to feel.
That makes sense. So you do think that the top 8 we saw at GP Vegas was more kind of an exception. It was a weird paper tournament thing with a bunch of things coming into play. It's not the metagame you should be packing your sideboards for going on forward.
I think you should respect it because that's the paper metagame, but compared to online, paper moves way slower. As well as, don't forget, You know, people are still yet to pick up their cards from Cardmarket at the event. So yeah, you know, people might just have Rakdos lures from the previous metagame before the lockdown and pandemic.
There's no rental system at a GP. So.
Yeah, exactly. But I think that's kind of my analysis on the top 8. Don't respect it too much, but definitely see what people are playing on paper, and as well as make sure you pack your sideboards with what I suggested.
All right, listen, unless you have any other notes to add, that was kind of our overview of the metagame for December 2021, the last month of 2021. We'll see what the next year has to give. In the meantime, we'll still be playing Modern, because Modern is still the best. We'll still be playing Paper Magic, because we love Paper Magic, but we'll see you next time. Well, please thank you for your subbing, because we appreciate it greatly. And we'll thank Harry for coming all the way to Berlin to be in the Cardmarket studio to talk about the Modern metagame.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and good luck in your tournaments.